roundtable about the changing geopolitical nature, given an, here you go. Wait, no, not yet, just, I'm this one. Great. So we're gonna be discussing, the potential changing geopolitical nature, particularly as a result of the new US administration. And I thought I'd start with this really interesting sort of session where Senator Tammy Duckworth questioned at the time, Peter Hegseth was going to become the US Secretary of Defense. What is, if he could name countries in ASEAN? And his answer was, I don't know who's in ASEAN, but we have very good relations with Japan and South Korea. So I just, I mean, whether that's cluelessness or don't really care. But that's also coinciding with this whole idea that somehow our region is always sort of hedging between China and the US. So I thought I'll ask each of the speaker to give us a quick sort of opinion about what do you think the new US leadership has shaped your relation with the relationship with your country. So we'll start with the most favorable pro-US country in the region, the Philippines. Yes, you can. Yeah.
Let's grab this. Hello? Okay, thanks. So in contrast to the previous government under Duterte, as many of you will have probably observed, there has been that snapback to our quote unquote traditional allies. Sadly, I don't disagree with you. The Philippines is probably the most pro-US or US oriented in its both its foreign policy and geopolitical security sort of approach. Of course, what is looming for the Philippines is the question of China. The sort of contestation over the South China Sea. This didn't really become a huge election issue, but over the last couple of years, there's been greater tension over the presence of Chinese vessels, interference with economic activity, sort of staking of the claims over those clusters of rocky islands, basically. So there's that. And then also, of course, anything that happens in Taiwan is going to affect the Philippines being so close and also being in some ways politically aligned. So with Trump 2.0, actually, there hasn't been much mention of the Philippines, both in terms of trade and in terms of security, at least not in that sort of spectacular way. So in some sense, it's a wait and see because the Trump administration is unpredictable. So I think we're going to have to roll with the punches when they finally come. Okay.
So when it comes to Trump and particularly the tariffs, when it comes to the economy, I mean, Indonesia is once again kind of, I guess, insulated by one of the more lamentable facts of its economy, which is that it actually doesn't trade that much with the world. Whereas, Vietnam, like 30% of their GDP is exports to the United States. For Indonesia, it's like 2%. So they're simply not as exposed to the punitive tariffs as other countries in the region. Whereas, if you were in Vietnam or Thailand or what's more, even China, you would be really, really worried. So there isn't really a sense of panic in Jakarta at the moment. There is a team negotiating with the Americans around lowering Indonesian non-tariff barriers as sort of the price of getting the quote unquote reciprocal tariffs taken off. But there isn't this sense of sort of national crisis as there is in, for instance, Vietnam. So they obviously we would want to see some kind of more, as Anwar Ibrahim is kind of implicitly proposing, a joint ASEAN meeting with Trump to negotiate some tariff relief, to do a deal essentially that doesn't lead to all these countries doing sweetheart deals with White House in ways that might actually be damaging to their neighbors, say. But for now, the impulse is, as Prabowo has said very clearly, yeah, okay, well, if their requests are reasonable around, local content requirements or biosecurity or quotas or that kind of thing, yeah, let's do a deal. Let's talk. So he's not been particularly ideological about it. In terms of geopolitics more broadly, I don't think that there's a deep sense of sort of betrayal in Indonesia around the Trump administration. I think there's a long-standing and deep kind of cynicism among the political elite about the United States that was there under previous presidents and is still there now. So I don't think it's as dramatic a break with the past in terms of public and elite perceptions of the United States. And in fact, there are pockets of real admiration for Trump and the MAGA movement in parts of the Indonesian elite, including in parts of Prabowo's own sort of political circles as well.
Hi, thanks. This is not my usual beat to talk about international relations. So anyway, at the elite and policy level, Singapore lives and dies by a rules-based multilateral system that supports free trade and rational investment decisions. So any regime or power that can be persuaded to maintain this is certainly, an ally. And secondly, Singapore has also, on the other hand, not the luxury of choosing who it wants to be friends with and who it doesn't want to be friends with. So everybody is a friend, and there is always some way to be found to find, common interests and mutual benefit. Of course, finally, I would say that in the general election, this was a very, very hot topic about how the PAP needed a very good team, and certainly the Deputy Prime Minister, who had been sent out to what was supposed to be a very hotly contested hotly contested ward. They would be the incumbent, the PAP, but one where the opposition party had sent its star catch for the election. And the appeal of the Prime Minister was to not lose his task force man, the Deputy Prime Minister Gan Kim Yong, who was known to be in the midst of negotiations to try and find a better resolution to, the tariffs that the US had threatened to impose on us, which is really the minimum level of a 10% tariff in terms of the Liberation Day regime, but something higher, 25 for pharmaceuticals. The sectoral tariffs are a little more punitive. So there is that as well. So, my final point, which we just held the Shangri-La dialogue. So you can imagine how the atmospherics needed to be sorted out so that would be viable. And I think it was still a very useful dialogue. I'm sure you followed it. And last point, actually, we are the contributors to the Asian Barometer Survey. And if you go to our website, in our most recent release of that survey, we do have not the elite policy level, but the mass level views of the relationship between Singapore and US, Singapore and China. And basically, the feeling of affinity to the US has been coming down, and the feeling of affinity to China has been coming up. But again, net, it's about the same after that. So I've just described the trend, but then it becomes exactly the Goldilocks point again. Same. We love them equally, say people. Whew, I think the policymakers are much relieved.
Okay, on Malaysia, I guess 2 quick points on this idea of the rules-based order, or the West being being the leaders of the rule-based order. First quote comes, I want to read these quotes directly to you so I get it right. But the first quote comes from Anwar Ibrahim, who spoke at the ANU last year. And he said, "Why has the West been so vociferous, vehement, and unequivocal in the condemnation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, while remaining utterly silent and in the relentless bloodletting inflicted on innocent men, women, and children of Gaza. So that's the first point about this breakdown of the global rules-based order, Western-led. And the second quote I wanted to quote you was a Chinese author writing in a Malaysian newspaper from Beijing, who was writing about this Gulf China ASEAN summit that I mentioned earlier. And he wrote that discussions underscored the importance of a rules-based global trading system, one that prioritizes equitable development over zero-sum competition. He described ASEAN as each region brings unique advantages to the table. ASEAN has youthful demographics and natural resources. I'm sure it's the natural resources are probably a bit more important, but the Gulf has energy resources and financial capital, and China has vast consumer market and manufacturing prowess. But he concludes with this idea that by pulling together these three important forces, there's going to be an innovative, inclusive, and pragmatic model representing a rules-based multilateral trading system with the World Trade Organization. So I think those two quotes sort of exemplify that Anwar is probably saying what a lot of Southeast Asian leaders and others believe, which is we are seeing the breakdown of the legitimacy of the West as pushing this idea of a rules-based order.
I wonder what Anwar has said about Russia. I suspect he said a lot about Gaza, so that could be reversed. Yeah. Vietnam. Well, as has been said, for Vietnam, it's an existential issue. The US is their main or major export market, and with the threatened 46% tariff, that is extremely consequential. The added complication is the Trump administration has, in addition, also required of Vietnam to reduce its imports from China. And China is its #1 import market because many of the technology goods which are assembled in Vietnam, Samsung phones, flat screen TVs, the components are made in China. So it's almost impossible for Vietnam to comply with those requirements without breaking their economic model. Now, if they were to comply, those industries wouldn't move to North Carolina anyway. They would go to Bangladesh or somewhere else. So it's not like the Trump administration actually is going to be advantaging American industry by breaking Vietnam's. I'm not sure what the solution will be. Vietnam is dealing with the Trump administration as they would deal with any oligarchy or autocratic administration. They've done a deal with him for a golf course where basically Trump is just bringing his name, but then getting a percentage of the equity. That hasn't worked yet. But the Vietnamese are very good negotiators and very pragmatic, and they will continue to work that as best as they can. On the geostrategic side, equally, it's very concerning for Vietnam. They understand what it means for the US to withdraw from the region geostrategically. They know that that will be extremely consequential for them. They are good at standing up to China in a different way from the Philippines, but they have been, as I said in my presentation, they have been drawing lines for 1,000 years. They've been managing that relationship very effectively for a long time, and they're not going to stop. But it'll become much harder and more complex, which is one of the reasons why Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh seems to be constantly on aeroplanes, traveling the world. Macron was in Vietnam last week. They are on a diplomatic offensive because they, absent a strong US presence, they are looking for alternative sources of influence, help, partnership, other voices that can speak up for Vietnam. But there is no other United States out there to be found, so it's a difficult thing. But, Trump is not forever. His legacy might be forever. The damage that is done might actually long outlive him and his administration. So we'll have to see what the long game plays out as.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. In terms of Thailand, I think if anyone studied Thailand, we have the bamboo diplomatic. Like, we just hanging out with the one who has powerful, powerful country in the world. So basically, Thailand shipping around U.S. and China for a long time, and the Trump presidency come up, and just before Trump 2.0, we have Biden, and Biden in the Biden administration, we just have celebrating 190 years diplomacy between Thailand and the U.S. And then when Trump come and just getting us 36% of tax rates, that doesn't mean we have a really good relation that much, but then it's really, when they declare the tax rates is quite shock for Thai people, but it doesn't seem like the government, do much enough to, make it better. Basically, the government said they send someone to the U.S. to make sure that they can have a time to talk with Trump, but then until now, we haven't got to see that coming yet. And the things about the tax rates and the tariff is that would make Thailand be more rely on China more than the U.S. But if you have a look at the export-import market in Thailand and U.S. and China, you see that the U.S. is the biggest market for Thailand export. So we get a lot of benefit from being a good relationship with the U.S., but at the same time with China, we lose quite a huge benefit trading with China. But then again, the government should, if my advice, I think the government shouldn't rely much on China, but try to make a good relation with the U.S. But then, after the tariff and I think the shock period has gone, and now to see after the reaction of every country trying to make contact with Trump, I think Thai government is very slow in making this happen and better. So I'm not sure how it's gonna turn out, but Trump, I think for Thailand, we just wait and see how things turn out.
Okay, so it sounds like a wait and see approach for everybody because we've been dealing with this uncertainty for a while, right? So I want to pick up on one of the themes that, sorry, it's not in the questions I sent you guys. That one of the themes that emerged, after today's talk is about, what Seoul talks a lot about democratic regression, and the United States is clearly going through this, and quite shockingly for a lot of us who have sort of being brought up, studying politics and being like, the U.S. model of democracy is one of those big ones we should aspire to. So how is what's been happening in the U.S. in terms of democratic regression seen through the eyes of your country or affect the way, we think about democracy in a region that's desperately trying to get more democracy to begin with?
Okay. Or you keep it?
Oh, it's okay.
Oh, okay. I was thinking after Lian spoke earlier about Indonesia, that one thing that you can say about at least the nominal democracies left in Southeast Asia is what you can't take away are elections. Whether or not the quality of those elections are poor, whether, they may not be very competitive and they may suffer from structural infirmities, but that's what democracy in a certain sense looks like in Southeast Asia, and that means it's not very democratic. You can have elections and no democracy, right? North Korea has regular elections. Indonesia under Suharto had elections every 5 years like clockwork. So unfortunately, that's what we're seeing in the world. It's democratic recession overall and backsliding in countries that were relatively more democratic. The US itself under Trump 1.0 and again now, it seemed like things had stabilized and normalized when Trump lost his re-election bid the first time, but then when he won again, it's like the norm of democracy, the kind of, even if the US is not the best representative, actually, not at all, but it still counts as something, given all the soft power that had accumulated, especially in the post-Cold War era. It doesn't make the job of pro-democracy movements in Southeast Asia and the Philippines in particular, it doesn't make the job easier for them.
Anybody could jump in anytime, doesn't have to go in order.
Democracy is not a big issue.
Maybe I can jump in about a democratic backslide. I think for Thailand, looking at the US democratic backslide, we just think that they are the same. The same in Thailand, because Thailand democratic backslide, I think like Sol said that sometimes the election doesn't mean anything that much in a country like in Thailand or in Southeast Asia, that they might have a deal before the election coming up. So basically, like the election result doesn't change much. Like for example, for Thailand election 2019 and 2023, the prime minister had changed, but the body pretty much the same, like the cabinet and the ministerial position. So I think one thing that the US democracy is more like advanced than in Thailand is that they can re-elect and they 4 years and then they got the election, the frequency of election. But yeah, and also if you are not happy with this president, then you can kick him out like 4 years later. But in Thailand, sometimes, as you see the election result in 2023, the Move Forward Party win the election, but then we got Pheu Thai to be a government. That's really unexpected.
Can I be surprising and say democracy matters a lot in Singapore for the elites as well as the mass level? So some of the lessons that have been taken, not just Trump 2, but Trump 1, even before then, are the following. First, that at both mass and elite level, we must not be in a situation where we find a vacuum of leadership, and certainly a vacuum of good leadership. So, there would be zero tolerance for that at every level, including in the mass level. The second takeaway is really this, that the center must hold. You cannot have economic and social policy that causes, people to be disillusioned with the market economy, even if there is, even past 60 years in Singapore, a highly redistributive policy while we were a market economy. It's actually democratic socialism at its best. You've seen the PAP government double down on, reinforcing the center and social support to ensure that the market goes and does what it does, but the rewards must most certainly be felt by, everyone, so that there's a stake in the system. And the taxes are for that reason, albeit, great unhappiness with the value-added tax. We have the GST, which was raised, but explained as a way in which, all the resources that are necessary are then plowed towards where the needs are, and that the playing field is tilted towards those in greater need. So that's the second point, that the center must continue to be shored up in terms of a socio-economic system. Then the third one is this, and this one's controversial because I think of course, I inhabit the world of the democratic scholars and know that the argument today for Singapore is that you've seen a democratic recession and executive aggrandizement, primarily with regard to rules on media. And I would just say as a response, look right across all the developed Western countries, they're all trying to cope in some manner among liberal democracies as well with social media. And so there's much written about our rules to deal with the prevention of online falsehoods and manipulation of information. And that is really targeted at government-based or administrative data and falsehoods, not opinion, but still it's assessed as a step back in terms of democracy. And finally, there is another law that requires people who have political influence to declare their relationships with foreign parties, foreign agents, foreign groups, that this is declared. So these moves are considered to be illiberal, but take a look at Australia here, right? What you're dealing with in terms of foreign interference, and is there a case to be made for a need for that kind of law, which sounds illiberal, deals with the freedom of association, but how do you deal with the fact that some of the things that are undermining democracy can only be staunched by that? And so the lessons from the Trump, well, the whole political system that we see in the US is not just that, but also social media. Yeah. So fake news is out. Yeah. Liberal as it sounds, it's actually to reinforce what we think is liberal democracy too.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't hold Singapore up as a beacon of light with social media regulation. I think POFMA is hugely problematic. But let me just talk on this foreign interference thing, because I was just in the Philippines for the midterms, and I'm doing a project on Malaysia and Indonesia. And in the West, we've been talking about foreign interference for quite a while now, and most recently, really, obviously, quite understandably concerned about Chinese and Russian foreign interference in elections and disinformation, foreign interference. But one interesting thing that I've noticed empirically over the past year or two is that often, as a response to that, Southeast Asians are saying, well, there's all this Western foreign interference in what was often very benign kind of programs, you know, second track diplomacy programs, journalism training, and so on. And so by selling this idea of, you know, there's all this foreign interference, the response is, yeah, sure, China and Russia is trying things, but, you know, the West does it too. And I'm not sure we're getting the message across correctly around that on foreign interference. And sometimes programs which were actually quite beneficial to democracy are now being seen as Western intervention, while previously they were fine.
Liam, and we'll have to end with Andrew, but I have a question specifically.
Well, I mean, as I tell the first year Asian politics students today, and you, like, a crappy democracy is still a democracy. But if we conceive of, you know, democracy in that classic minimalist pol sci definition of it, it's just a procedure for electing governance. I mean, I think as bad as things get, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, that trio of electoral democracies in Southeast Asia, I think democracy understood in those terms is going to be resilient. You know, can people who want to stand? Are they going to be unduly excluded because they threaten incumbents? And if they do win an election, are they allowed to win elections? And if they do win, do they get to govern? I think if that's your bare minimum standard, democracy will survive in that trio. I'm sorry, I don't file Singapore under that category. But the question is that these regimes are going to look perhaps less democratic than they really are in between elections, because you're going to have all the liberal elements of democracy have just been, you know, evaporated out of them. So they're going to be in this grey zone, and that comes when we're talking about the rhetoric of Australian foreign policy. We talk about democratic allies, or Western countries, you know, democratic allies. Well, what gets you to a ticket at the G7? Being a democracy. India is invited to the G7 on the weekend alongside Indonesia. Again, two countries that are, I believe, one has just been downgraded by BDM to electoral authoritarian. India, another borderline case. So if you want to conceive as a Western leader of your foreign policy as being bound up in an alliance of democracies, well, in Asia, 10 years in the future, they're going to be all these sort of borderline cases. And so if you want to limit yourself to that, you are going to have no allies, or you're going to be sort of disingenuously portraying effectively liberal democracies as, great friends based on shared values, yada, yada, yada.
So it sounds like all of us are like jumping out of our seats. We're going to have like a really engaging discussion, but unfortunately our time is up here, but we probably will afterwards. To conclude, I actually have a provocative question for you, Andrew, given you've been a long time diplomat for Australia. You said earlier in your presentation that, Australia and Vietnam have really good relationship. And this is despite very large political differences. So given this retreat of the US as this, democracy promotion, should Australia step in?
Thank you. Well, I was actually going to say that your question initially was about Trump's impact on democracy in the region. I think Trump's impact on diplomacy is also interesting. I think he'll be actually very good for diplomacy. And Vietnam is the case in point, where they've gone from being very good at diplomacy to being hyperactive, because in a period of uncertainty where existing relationships and understandings are no longer reliable, they are looking for alternatives. And I think that's not just true of Vietnam. I think it's probably true of most countries in the region to one degree or another. I mean, even the Europeans are waking up, right, and looking around and thinking, my God, the world is not what we thought, and we'd better do something on our own behalf. So I think that's really good for people in the diplomatic sphere and commentators and analysts. So that's a positive. No, I don't think Australia can step into the shoes of the United States, but Vietnam will be looking to sort of make up the deficit in bits and pieces. There's not another US out there to be picked up, just as when China introduced sanctions against Australia, there wasn't another China we could find, but we could make up the difference by cobbling together a variety, a diversity of markets. And that's where we are now, I think, where all the balls are in the air and people are going to be scrambling to create new relationships, find new opportunities, hedge in different ways, and try and make up for what is gone by what will be coming next. No one knows what it'll look like, but we know for sure that the future won't look like the past, and it's going to be very interesting.